Jacquelyn Lynn Diaz had been a deputy sheriff for 5 years, and her shift had been working from midnight until 8 in the morning and had had a share of drama. However, one particular night would be more dramatic than most, when around 2 a.m. Jacquelyn called dispatch to request a tow truck because the truck had broken down on a railway track. Unfortunately, they told her that the earliest a truck could be available would be in 1 hour, as the truck had been called out to a multi-vehicular accident. So Jacquelyn had to find an alternative solution because the train to Jacksonville was scheduled to cross that intersection at 2:35 a.m, which would give her a window of only 30 minutes. She also found that the train contained 240 tons of fertilizer, potassium phosphate and ammonium nitrate, which were a deadly combination. The only 2 people that could have helped her were either too young or too old, so it was left up to her to prevent a possible catastrophe. She then ran to the abandoned truck but found the doors were locked, and after breaking the driver's door window, she reached in and unlocked the door, but found the steering wheel locked and the keys were not in the ignition, and to make matters worse, the front wheels were turned to the left and were caught between the railway line. She returned to her car and drove behind the truck in an attempt to push it from the tracks, but to no avail. It was now 2:25 a.m. and she was running out of time. She called dispatch and told them about the urgency of the situation, but they were still unable to get anyone to attend. So it was up to Diaz to somehow remove the abandoned vehicle from the tracks, and there was no time to alert businesses and homes nearby in order to have them evacuate. She could not understand how someone could simply abandon their truck on the tracks. While she was contemplating her next move, she suddenly turned around and found herself face to face with a large truck, and the driver was standing next to her. He had black hair and bright blue eyes and asked if she needed some help, and she responded with, "Oh, thank God, yes, I do." After explaining her situation to the driver, he reacted immediately and backed up his rig. He then opened his side compartment and grabbed a small sledgehammer and a large screwdriver, and used them to break the passenger's door window, giving him access to the truck's cabin. Jacquelyn climbed in behind the steering wheel and, after checking her watch, found the time was now 2:32 a.m, which left them around 3 minutes to remove the truck or to run for their lives. The man then set the screwdriver against the ignition on the steering column and struck it with a hammer and shattered the lock. He then pulled the steering wheel as hard as he could and broke the last locking pin, allowing the front wheels to turn, where Jacquelyn grabbed the steering wheel and pushed it to the right and continued to turn the steering wheel until the front wheels were straight. The man quickly pushed Jacquelyn out of the truck as the crossing bells and flashing lights began ringing. The train was only 1 mile away as Jacquelyn ran to the side of the road, and the man climbed into the cab of his truck and started to drive his truck forward. He eased his front bumper against the tailgate of the pickup and began to push, where the truck moved about 1 foot before stopping. By this time, the lights of the approaching train were clearly visible as the train's horn started to ring. The train was now less than 1/4 mile away as the truck attempted again to push the other truck clear, but still it did not move. The train gave more blasts of the horn as it came terrifyingly closer. The truck slowly started moving the other truck forward, and the train was now only seconds from the crossing. In one last effort, he finally pushed the truck across the second set of tracks, where his truck followed it to safety. After the drama, Jacquelyn expected to see the man and his truck on the other side of the tracks, but neither of them were there. She asked an old man if he'd seen where the truck driver had gone, but he only shook his head. Jacquelyn said to the old man and his grandson that he deserved the commendation, but the old man shook his head and said, "I didn't see no truck or driver, I only saw you." But Jacquelyn knew that there was a truck driver helping her that night, and she was going to find him. She examined the interior of the truck and could see the steering column was destroyed from the impact of the hammer and screwdriver and the smashed glass on the doors. The truck's cabin was bent from being pushed, and she knew she had not done it herself. Someone had helped her. Over the next 2 weeks, Jacquelyn made many phone calls and contacted every trucking company within 200-mile radius of Plant City, but to no avail. Nobody had had a truck in the area that night. She patrolled Highway 574 and US 92 from Tampa to Plant City every night, hoping to see the truck and its driver. When she was in the second month of a search, she received a radio call from a fellow deputy, wondering if she would be willing to meet him for lunch. She hoped he had found some information regarding the unidentified trucker. They were at a truck stop restaurant, and if you're looking for a truck, why not start at a truck stop? He said, "Do you see your driver in here?" Whereupon she glanced around the room, but without any luck. As she looked around, she could see that the room was not just a section of the restaurant set aside for drivers, it was a shrine to truck drivers past and present, and around the entire room were framed newspaper articles of truck-related stories that covered the last 50 years that the truck stop was in business. Across from where they were sitting, she noticed the distinctive door logo at the back of an empty booth and immediately recognized it. It was the same logo she'd seen on the mystery truck 2 months before. In bold red letters on the black background it read RDT Inc. Jacquelyn then waved over the waitress to place her order, but at the same time asked her about the logo and pointed to the empty booth across from them. She said it was long before her time and had only worked there for 2 years. She suggested she ask the owner. As they were finishing their lunch, a man approached their table and said, "I'm the owner, and my name is Tom Davis. The waitress said you wanted some information about one of our logos." So Jacquelyn pointed to the empty booth and asked, "What can you tell me about that company?" He said it's no longer in business and hasn't been for 25 years. She said, "I'm positive I saw that logo on a truck 2 months ago." He replied, "Not that logo, you're mistaken, officer, and I'll show you what I mean," and walked across the room to the far corner and removed one of the framed newspaper articles from the wall and returned to her table. Jacquelyn then scanned the article that showed a photograph of a derailed train and a destroyed truck lying on its side. At the bottom was a photograph. The headline read, "Local driver Ronald Davis killed in spectacular train crash," and displayed a small picture of the same young man Jacquelyn had met 2 months before. The article said, "Early Tuesday morning at the unprotected rail crossing at the junction of Turkey Creek and Sydney Roads, an unidentified motorist ran his vehicle into a second automobile driven by 18-year-old Mary Ann Diaz of Plant City, who was stopped behind a pickup truck driven by Kenneth Myers of Bradenton, Florida. Both vehicles were stopped waiting for the train. The impact was so great, according to witnesses, it pushed both Mr. Myers and Ms. Diaz's vehicles onto the tracks in the path of the oncoming train. Ms. Diaz's vehicle was severely damaged and unable to be moved from the tracks on its own. Mr. Myers made several attempts to open the doors to extricate the woman and a 2-year-old daughter, Jacquelyn, who was buckled into a car seat. Mr. Myers reported at the scene that Ms. Diaz, slumped over the steering wheel, was unresponsive and bleeding from a wound on her forehead. Ronald Davis of RDT Trucking pulled his truck loaded with grain onto the accident scene a few minutes later. He made several attempts to help Mr. Myers and other bystanders pry open Ms. Diaz's door, but the young woman and her daughter were trapped inside. Mr. Myers told the reporter that he heard sirens in the distance, but they were racing the train, and he knew the train was closer. Mr. Myers attempted to drive his vehicle off of the tracks, but it too would not start. Mr. Myers guided Davis's truck behind Ms. Diaz's automobile in an attempt to push both vehicles to safety. Davis pushed Ms. Diaz's vehicle until it rested against the rear bumper of Mr. Myers' pickup. The train horn blared as Davis began pushing both vehicles to safety. Once the vehicle belonging to Ms. Diaz crossed safely to the far side of the tracks, Davis apparently attempted to maneuver his rig out and around the 2 stalled vehicles. But before he could clear the tracks, the train broadsided the trail, dragging Davis and his truck over a 1/4 mile before the train derailed and Davis's truck exploded into flames. According to Hillsborough County Coroner Patricia Kenny, Ronald Davis appeared to have died instantly on impact. Jacquelyn was speechless and passed the picture frame to her companion and looked at Tom Davis, who was still watching her. Tom Davis was the first to speak. "Ronnie was my son. I'm Jacquelyn Diaz. My mother is Mary Ann. I was the baby in the car with my mother that night."